Hello and welcome to Strange Journeys podcast. I am Tim, your co host. I'll be filling in today for Tom, who is currently locked in a closet. Shh, don't tell anybody. We are going to jump over. We'll get our introduction here for you. And we are live here on Strange Journeys.
Can you tell us your name? Did you live here? Did you die here? Do you want to take a trip?
Well, welcome back. Like I said, I'm Tim. I'm filling in for Tom this week. He is out on vacation, or as we're calling it currently, locked in the closet. So the ETs are taking over for a little while. We'll be doing the next two episodes. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about some families of serial killers once we get there. I just do want to remind you that we provide these shows first and foremost for you, the watchers, for entertainment. We are not by any means and do not claim to be scholars or experts in any of the topics we cover. We are simply enthusiasts and storytellers who have fun with these topics while doing our best to respect individual beliefs. And please remember that we are live and nothing is rehearsed, edited out later. What you see is what you get. So just be aware I'm here by myself today, so it may be kind of interesting as we go along. Um, ET facts for the week. We'll talk about those. Favorite horror movies. I am a big horror movie fan. Been watching them since I was a kid. In fact, I remember watching television with my dad like this, just because you wanted to watch the show, but you didn't want to be scared. My personal two favorite horror movies are actually Boogeyman from just a few years ago. Was fantastic only because of the fact that the first half of the movie scares you to death, and then the second half actually kicks in the plot and gets interesting. But one that I remember and still watch to this day is Kurt Russell in The Thing back from 1972, one of those great old movies. Still gives me nightmares as we're out there. Um, as you know, last week we had our Strange Authors number 2 with Elizabeth Parker. She got in and told us some ghost stories there. We do want to remind you that you can find us both on YouTube and on Twitch. So if you're not out there, we certainly want you joining us while we're there. Um, we've got our Patreon as well. We would love to have you with Patreon at this point, so we can certainly have you join us at any point that you're ready here. Um, let's jump over here real quick so you can get an image of that, and this will send you right to our Patreon page. You can certainly look that up there. And all right. So certainly you join us for Patreon. That way we can see exactly what's going on. That way we have a chance you can get out there and sponsor us while we're out here as well and know what's going on with us. as well as our brand merchandise. Join us at our Strange Journeys merchandise store. All right. Just remember that we do have that Strange Journeys merchandise with 15% off. Just use the code SJ15 at the end for that 15% off as you're out there doing that. We're going to go to our strange sightings this week. We do have some radar footage that actually came from Fox News. This is part of the Navy radar from a sighting that was actually seen all the way back in March of this year. But I want you to see exactly what's going on the Navy radar and the ship that they've got out there.
At least one of the objects was moving upwards of 160 miles per hour.
138 now.
We're going to rewind that just for a minute. Sorry about the technical difficulties there. So thoughts on that? Anybody that is out there watching us today? I know we've got Tom out there watching us on Twitch, as well as Kristen. She is out there watching us on Facebook at this point. So my personal opinion of it is this is a pretty impressive piece, especially for the Navy to have released and saying that there are as many as 14 of them out there while they're watching that. All right. Pretty impressive footage that is going on there. So you've got the 14 of them on the radar screen there. Today's episode is called Families That Kill Together. And we're going to take a look here at some serial killing families here in the United States, particularly those that were involved in incidents in Kansas during the area of Bleeding, Kansas, and the years that would follow it. Kansas actually has the designation of being the first place to have had 3 serial killing families within 20 years. Now, there's a lot of strange fascination of serial killers. They occupy the imagination and nightmares, probably with some good reason. We question the reasons that they kill people. We try to understand that type of mindset. And more importantly, we're enwrapped with the bloody details. I mean, lots of us are rubberneckers. We're driving down the road looking over just to see what's going on. If we see a car accident, just know what's happening there. It's not a surprise. That's been going on for decades. Certainly happened with serial killers. in the early days of Kansas, there's a 20-year period that there's actually not only one serial killing family, but three different sets of serial killing families in Kansas. The Bloody Benders, the Staffelbacks, and the Kellys are all involved in Kansas within a 20-year period, beginning in about 1870, going all the way into 1891 and 97 being the last incident with the Staffelbacks that are out there. I'm going to jump over here just a little bit. Beginning in May of 1871, a family of German immigrants moved to Labette County, Kansas. It's actually in the southeast corner of Kansas, less than about 50 miles from the Oklahoma state border today, and they set up what is called a way station. Now, a way station was a point along the Santa Fe Trail that you could stop to get supplies. You might be able to take a real bath, perhaps for the first time in weeks. Or to sleep in a real bed. Most people misunderstand what was going on along the way station or along the Santa Fe Trail. We imagine the old Western movies where all the wagons were right in a row and the people were riding in the covered wagons. That isn't what happened, though. A lot of times you walked along beside your wagon and you slept underneath the wagon at night. So to arrive at a way station was a huge treat. The Bender family would actually set up a way station there in Labette County, Kansas. The family consisted of John Bender Sr., his wife. Let's see if we can get the image to come up here for us. John Bender Sr., his wife Elvira, who sometimes is referred to as Kate, his son John Jr., and Katie, who is the daughter. Katie was actually a self-professed faith healer and witch. She actually put advertisements out in the Independence, Missouri newspaper so that people would actually be able to see that she was out there prior to that. Why am I not? What's going on with that is that she's out there, she's actually committing murder, even during the time period that she was in Independence, prior to them setting up in Labette County. So in May of 1871, the family sets up in Labette County, and it's here that they decide to commit murder. They've stretched a very long black cloth across the main room, dividing it into two separate rooms. They would then give a guest, usually traveling by themselves, the seat of honor at the head of the table. Usually that place was reserved for the head of the family. In this case, they would give it to this particular guest. Then the son or father would take a sledgehammer that weighed 8 pounds and they would hit the guest over the back of the head from behind that particular piece of canvas that was stretched across the room. If that didn't kill the person, the women were very quick to slice the victim's throat. They would then open a trap door just below the edge of the table and dump the body into the cellar right below, where the family would continue to mutilate the body until they got bored with it or they came up with a new victim. This went on for about 2 years. In the winter of 1872, George Longcore and his infant daughter left Independence, Kansas, not to be confused with Independence, Missouri, headed for Iowa. George was a recent widower. He had lost both his wife and his son to cholera. He decided the best thing he could do is travel to Iowa, where he had family living, and to set up a farm closer to them. However, they never arrived in Iowa. It's around the same point in time that we actually get some interesting documentations from the city of Topeka. There's a traveling priest that has been through the area, and he had been at the Bender's Way Station around the winter of 1872, and he traveled to Topeka because he was very concerned. He informed law enforcement officers that he had stopped at the Bender's Way Station and seen the husband walking through the house carrying a bloodied sledgehammer. The priest did not stay the night. It bothered him enough that he went on ahead and he left. About 3 days later, Charles Ingle, Laura Ingalls Wilder's uncle, arrived in the city of Topeka, and he told a very similar story as well. He says that he had been traveling through the Bender's Way station when he saw the son carrying a bloodied sledgehammer through the house. There were law enforcement officers that were sent down to the Bender's property, but at the time, nothing seemed out of place. It would only be a few months later that things become more questionable because what happens is Dr. William Henry York, who had been the neighbor of George Longcore in Independence, Kansas, deciding that he was concerned enough that his former neighbor had never arrived in Iowa that he was going to go out and he would investigate it. He actually went searching for them and he arrived in Fort Scott, Kansas. He had been told that they had never made it to Fort Scott, so he backtracked and went back to the Bender's Way station. At this point, at some point after leaving the um, Fort Scott, Kansas, he actually disappears. About a month later, his brother, who is a Kansas state senator, begins to wonder about the missing doctor, and he actually makes a trip towards to go find his brother as well. He arrives at the Bender's Way station, and when he is there, he questions them. And one of the things that happens is that Elvira Bender says he was here. He went on his way. He must have been attacked by Indians. At the time, there were no known Indian attacks happening in Kansas. Certainly, being as close to the Oklahoma border, they were very close to Indian territory at the time. But most of the time, those Indians did not actually come far enough up into Kansas for that to happen. Instead, he accused Elvira Bender of doing something to his brother. She claimed instead that she was a witch, and she cursed him and threw him out of her house, telling him not to come back. The senator then became quite suspicious and he began questioning people all over the nearby town. And he began hearing a number of stories about missing persons in the area. 3 days later, after calling a town meeting about the Benders, he decided that they were going to raid the Benders' location and see what was going on. But when they got there, they discovered the Benders were gone. They had left everything, including their livestock, behind. A neighbor said that the livestock were in such bad shape at that point that they were starting to die from exhaustion and from not having any food inside the corral with them. What they did discover was a sickening smell coming from under the table where the trap door was. The trap door had been nailed shut, and it took them a little bit of time to pry it open. When they climbed down there, they didn't find any bodies. Instead, what they found was a large amount of clotted blood, so bad that the ground was like mud from the amount of blood that was down there that had begun to clot and to begin to rot down there. At which point they knew there was something wrong, and they actually began to investigate the area, including both the garden and the orchard, looking to find out what was going on. They took a long metal rod and began stabbing it down into the ground. At about 7 p.m. that evening, they actually found the body of Dr. York buried face down in the orchard. They estimate that his feet were less than 6 inches from the surface, so he wasn't buried very far down. They would go on to find during the next 2 days a total of 20 bodies. That's a huge number of people to have been killed, 20 total. Some reports state that there were actually as many as there were body parts in bits and pieces for as many as 48 other people. So we're talking at the most, you're talking about 70 people. That's a large number of people to be killed in a very short amount of time period. There are lots of things that go on because, of course, we know the Benders get away. You're talking about 60 people total. Of course, people are looking for them. And over the years, there have been lots of legends that relate to the Benders. One of the things that goes on is that they claim their deathbed confessions from a posse that was sent out looking for the Benders, that they chased the Benders down and hung them from trees along the Marnus Sinde River. There's no evidence that that actually happened. Because of the description of Katie Bender, who was said to have very long red hair and who would also wear men's breeches and shirt whenever she was out and about, there would be a total of 50 women in the state of Kansas tried as being Katie Bender, the daughter. That's a huge number of women. But you have to understand what's going on the Santa Fe Trail at this point. People are walking along that trail, and women would wear men's breeches and shirts because the long dresses would catch on the grasses as they were going along. And so what happens is in both the cities of Dodge City, in Wichita, and in Topeka, there would be multiple women tried as Katie Bender, all of which were found that they were not to be her along the way. However, there's a document that belongs to the state of Kansas that points in a different direction. In 1880, there was a family that set up a new way station in a place called Four Corners, Kansas. It's a city that doesn't exist anymore. It's a little bit more than 12 miles from where I live, so not very far away, 20 miles south of the city of Topeka. And while they had set up that way station, there was a woman walking along Kansas Avenue inside the city of Topeka in the downtown area that law enforcement recognized as being Katie Bender. And they wanted to catch her, but they didn't just want her, they wanted the entire family to be captured along the way. And so they decided that they would follow her out of town. However, when she got outside of town, she actually lost the law enforcement officers that were behind her, and they used a tracker to trace her the rest of the way. When they arrived at this new way station in the Four Corners area, they discovered a group of 4 people leaving the area in a hot air balloon about 500 feet up in the air. Now, what happens is there's actually a signed affidavit from all the members of the posse recognizing that the Benders were escaping the second time. Interestingly enough, John Bender Sr. was a member of the Army Corps of Observationists during the United States Civil War. There was a unit that was dedicated to watching the battles from hot air balloons over the battlefields and signaling down so that they could let others know what was happening. He would have been familiar with the workings of the hot air balloon. It isn't known how he could have gotten a hot air balloon in Kansas or if they made one while they were here. It's at this location that there's still a foundation currently that sits off back in the trees. At this location, they discovered another 10 bodies in shallow graves. So now we're talking about a total of 70 people. However, this doesn't get recorded in history as being the Benders. It just gets recorded that they're out there. So whether or not it was the Benders is still questionable at this point, but most of the members of the posse did believe it was them. But of course, now they've made their second escape. Now, in 2014, there's a young man by the name of Greg Flickinger, and Greg comes to the state of Kansas claiming that he is a direct descendant of Katie Bender, and he offers proof of a family Bible containing the Bender's genealogy going back to the 1880s. The original family Bible had been found at the Labette County, Kansas area. So this would have been a new one that was pieced together. They have done some testing on it. The ink and the paper date to about the 1880s. He claims that the Benders moved on to a location in modern day Nevada along the California Trail and set up a third way station, continuing to their murder spree along the way. There has been an archaeological excavation that has been done on the site, revealing approximately 250 more bodies. However, archaeologists today claim that it is a Indian grave site and not a Bender's Way site where they were killing people. There are very few white people. Most of the bodies there were Native Americans or African Americans, people that the Benders had not been known to kill previously. If the totals are correct, you're talking about a family that killed more than 300 people in their lifetimes, 2 generations, more than 300 people, if that site is actually a Bender site. That's a huge number of people when you think about it. 300 victims plus victims to be killed by 4 people. In 2017, there was a body exhumed in Minnesota that is believed to be John Jr. The DNA does match the Flickinger family, the family that claimed that they were related to the Benders that we just talked about. He was actually executed in Minnesota in 1887 for murder. The body also matches his description. John Jr. was believed to be about 6'8", and they measured this out. So he stands at about 6'7". So it's very possible that he is there. The state of Kansas does own a number of artifacts that belong to the Benders in the Labette County area, including a hammer and several of the knives that were used. The hammer that is on display currently does have little brown specks all over it. Those specks were tested in 2015, and they do test out as human DNA. Shows that they were using that as one of the weapons that they used to kill people. Now, some believe they returned in 1887 to the state of Kansas under the family name Kelly. And we'll talk about the Kellys here for just a few minutes. The Kellys arrived in Kansas in 1869. The father's name was William. He married a woman named Kate. Once he arrived here, they had a son named William Jr. that people called Billy. And then they had a daughter named Kit as well. William moved his family in 1887 to a little town called Oak City, Kansas. And it's here they began committing murder. They opened up a tavern for cattlemen and travelers. Oak City sits a little bit more than 15 miles above the Oklahoma border. Would have been the perfect place to commit murder, especially since many of the cowboys would come across that particular border and through the trails and would wind up there. They'd also use some of their victims would be travelers as well. Their victims always were well to do and had money with them. It was the key to what they were doing along the way. They wanted to make sure that they could steal as much money from each victim as possible. Now, there are some correlations with what happens. The women would actually prepare a meal for the guest, and they would give that guest a key seat at the table. They would then have poisoned the meal, and they would once the guests began feeling the effects of the poison, they would open the trap door that was underneath the edge of that table and dump the body into the cellar as well, underneath the edge of the table. If the fall didn't kill the victim, the poison would eventually do so. They were discovered in December of 1887 by a traveler from St. Louis who observed a foul stench in the tavern. He was by himself, and for whatever reason, the family was not around when he entered the tavern. He actually discovered the trapdoor under the table and discovered the body of two men down below. He ran to the local sheriff to let them know what he'd found, and during the course of their investigation, they found 12 more bodies, 10 men and two women, buried in the barn of the property. The posse that would actually follow them began 10 days after the discovery. They would actually find Kit and Billy near Wheeler, Texas, and hang them both without a trial. According to the newspaper articles of the day, Kit said, "We should confess," and Billy said, "Why bother? They're going to hang us anyway." They caught up with William 3 days after that in New Mexico. He admitted to killing 9 men and 2 women. Now you'll note that that doesn't match the 14 victims that they've already found on the site. They don't even bother to take him back to the state of Kansas. They hang him there and bury him in an unmarked grave in New Mexico. Finally, we have the Staffelbach family. And the Staffelbach family had been a problem since the onset of 1886. The family was made up of Edward Staffelbach, 3 daughters, 3 sons, and his wife, Nancy. From the moment the family was formed, they began having all kinds of problems. Long before they ever reached Kansas, Edward had already spent 2 terms in prison for murder. Both times he claimed that it was self defense. The first murder was in 1886 in Joplin, Missouri. He spent 2 years in prison in Joplin and then moved to join his family in Iowa. The second term would actually be served in Iowa from 1889 to 1896. He wouldn't join his family when they actually went to Kansas because he was in prison in Iowa. They decided that they really didn't believe his self defense claim, but at the same time, they couldn't prove that he hadn't been involved in self defense. In the meantime, Nancy moves the entire family to the town of Galena, Kansas, which is about 8 miles from the Oklahoma border and 16 miles from the Missouri state border. Galena at the time was probably one of the roughest towns in the West. It will certainly rank up there right alongside Dodge City and Deadwood, both of which were known to be extremely violent. At one time, a cousin of the Earps actually served as Wyatt Earp actually served as the town sheriff of Galena, Kansas, just to give you an idea of how rough this particular city it was. They wanted to make sure there was somebody there watching this city, and so they actually hired one of the Earps because of the fame of the Earp brothers itself. Records indicate that from 1878 to 1904, a minimum of one person died each night that Galena was there. It was actually a place that was set up because of the fact it had a huge lead vein that ran across the town. The lead vein, by the time it petered out, they said it measured a total of 17 miles in length. That's a huge amount of lead they were pulling out of there. It attracted all kinds of people, both the criminals and those who wanted to make money honestly. The town doctors believe it was so horrific inside the town that they would sleep during the day and try to take care of their business at night, particularly because they knew they were going to either have to stitch somebody up or prepare somebody for burial. Now, the Staffelbacks went to Galena as well looking for wealth. Here's a perfect place to do it, except that they weren't going to do it honestly. Nancy Staffelback had already made it so that her children were very much involved in crime. The three daughters were actually acting as prostitutes. One of them was already married to a man by the name of Michael Cobbler. He didn't seem to care that his wife was a prostitute at all. The three sons were known for robbing whoever they happened to come across while they were out there in the Galena area. So their goal was not to make money by doing it the honest way. They were going to make sure they stole as much as they could. And if they left bodies behind in the process, they really didn't care. It was on a warm summer night in 1897 when Frank Galbraith made an arrangement to meet up with Anna, one of the daughters. He arrives at the house completely drunk. All sources say that he was overly inebriated from his time in the saloons downtown. She refused to let him enter the house, and instead, she met him at the door with a corn knife. According to the reports, he began shouting that he had been stabbed only moments after he entered the house, at which point, two of the sons exited the house with pistols and shot him down. They then stripped the body down and proceeded to dump the body down a nearby mine where they would abandon it. The body was actually found by somebody passing by the next day. Um, a raid by law enforcement officers on July 28th of 1897 led to the arrest of two of the sons and three of the daughters, as well as the mother. Um, Two of the daughters and one of the sons would actually turn state's evidence in exchange for their freedom. In this state's evidence, they admitted to murdering at least 15 people spread out across the three states. So you're talking about a lot of people they've killed along the way. Now, all of the Staffelbacks, including the matriarch, Nancy Staffelback, would spend time in prison. Nancy was actually the first woman sentenced to state prison in the state of Kansas for her role in leading the crime spree. She died in 1910 inside the state prison system. So you've got three families, who are committing murder, who are dedicated to it along the way. Now, there are some ghost stories that occur along the way. One of those is the Bender's Ghost Lights. Now, the Bender's Ghost Lights occur in Lebec County today. One of the reasons that it has been such a popular site is that people like to go out there not only to learn about the murders themselves, but also for a chance to see those lights. They are orbs that float about 4 to 5 feet above the ground and will just sit there and hover for a short amount of time and then will simply disappear. Some people have attributed it to swamp gas. Others have said that it's something else. Something else along the way. However, those ghost lights are still seen. The property was just sold this past summer in 2020 for a total of $140,000. The people that bought it actually want to turn it into a museum to celebrate the Benders, as well as a chance to see the ghost lights along the way. The Staffelbacks have a spirit related to them as well. Currently, there's a place in Galena, Kansas that is labeled the Staffelback Bordello and Murder House. It is not the real location where the murders occurred. It's actually a two-story building that was built in 1901, long after the Staffelbacks were gone from Galena, Kansas. The building itself, though, is used primarily as a place to contact ghosts. The current owners claim that they have summoned the ghost of Anna to the building, and that she continues to haunt the building. Now, note that the building is not the original building, and whether or not it's Anna, they really don't know because the ghost has never said anything physically. Instead, what they've actually heard is the sounds of somebody running up and down the stairs, items that are falling throughout the house, and they've also heard a woman's laughter, but it could be anybody along the way. I do appreciate you joining us for Strange Journeys. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks when we're going to be talking about the Bridgewater Triangle. Thanks again. Have a great week.